movies, and feelings. Pop, pop. Bring Your Own Popcorn is a podcast that dives into people and the movies who love them. Let us preach to your choir or stoke your ire as we spiral down memory lane with cult classics, Jurassics, and other genres that rhyme with traffic. What we lack in education, we make up for with comedy, compassion, and camaraderie. I'm your host, Mixtape Majesty, inviting you to join me and an assortment of wonderful guests on fine podcast apps everywhere. Bring your own popcorn.
Welcome back to the show, Wrestling Junkies. This is episode 11 of season 2. I am your host, Ernie, and you are listening to another broadcast coming to you directly from Under the Apron. Today is Friday, September 30th, 2022, and happy International Podcast Day! Jocelyn O'Neill from the Semicolon Podcast reminded me what day it was, and I thought, how apropos that I recorded this episode on this very day. Check out her podcast. I'll leave the link in the show notes. It's about mental health, and you all know I'm a big advocate of mental health. It's one of the reasons why I have my show, talk about what I love, as well as my own health issues, wrestling with diabetes. Check that out. But most importantly, help her out the same way you all helped me out. Check out her show and show some support. And since it's International Podcast Day, you all heard the podcast trailers at the start and middle of the show in all my episodes. Why not shout out some more? I will have the links to these podcasts in the show notes, but let's shout out some more here as well. Happy International Podcast Day to my Twitter podcast hype crew. Y'all know who you are. Some of you I post follow Fridays. Today I'm gonna shout you out here on this podcast. So shout out to the Moss Pod who just shouted me out on Twitter earlier for Follow Friday. Drunk with Buds podcast, Holidays After Dark podcast, the We Needed Rose podcast, Real Play Games podcast who just recently started following us, and we're following right back. Guys, check out these awesome podcasts. Those are just a few of the shout outs. So if you didn't hear your name, there will be more. I will post more in the show notes later on. I will shout more here on this pod later in the episodes. But check out the Twitter account where we show this love right back. Plus more podcasts that I will be listening to in the downtime. So, once again, happy International Podcast Day to my podcast colleagues. Put those horns in the air and chew sweet me. Yes, I'm doing the chew sweet right now. If you know what I'm referring to, that's the NWO greeting. Or if you heard the story of pro wrestler and now podcaster X-Pac tell it. He took it from the Turkish mafia. Chew sweet for life. Okay, now I have a question for all the wrestling junkies. Who do you think is the greatest wrestling villain of all time? Who would you consider to be the Joker or Thanos or even Lex Luthor of the wrestling business? I've seen articles and may or may not have been inspired to do a list of my very own on what I grew up with. I mean, everyone has their own opinions. I just happened to be influenced by a list that I didn't agree with and wanted to include my people and share it with you here on this podcast. And so let's talk a lot about that. The greatest wrestling villains in the business. Before we get on that, I always love to talk about the podcast at the top of the show and the success it has amassed over the past few months. We are climbers, and we are climbing that proverbial ladder to the top. Thanks to you, the wrestling junkies, we are scratching and clawing our way to 2,000 downloads, little by little. Not rushing it. I'm trusting the process. We are getting there. That's our goal for the next month in October. We're going to get there. 1,620 downloads so far. Thank you if you are sharing it to your friends that love wrestling, or if you are sharing the episode about diabetes with anyone that you know, friends, family, or significant other. Thank you for all of that. I really, really appreciate it. I am proud of those episodes. I am proud of doing this episode for you guys. And I just want to raise awareness about the diabetes. So I made a part 2. A part 3 will be coming out later in the month. It's going to be there. I have more great news. In addition to listening to us on Spotify and Anchor, which is totally free, by the way, if you haven't, or if you are not yet, go start a podcast on Anchor. It is totally free. Might be doing the same thing I am doing, and you might be getting more listeners than I am, but hey, totally free, right? But in addition to all of that, you can now listen to our show from Under the Apron on Apple Podcast. That is correct. That is right. We are on Apple Podcast. All of our past episodes are there, as well as our new episodes. And I'm going to be bringing you fresh new episodes. So smash that subscribe button and give us a review. Tell us how you really feel. Don't sugarcoat it. Please don't sugarcoat it. Give us a 1-star review if we're not for you. We're not for everybody. Or if you want to be a Dave Meltzer and give us a 5-star review, if you're really digging what we're doing and what we're talking about, give us a 5-star review. It's up to you. It's all in your hands. Tell Michael, my co-host, who I occasionally bring on the show, how you feel about his takes when he's sober or drunk. Drunk Michael is totally different than sober Michael. And if you listen to past episodes, you can totally tell when he's there and when he's not there. Tell us what you really think about the podcast. Tell us what you really feel about us. Tell me what you really feel about my podcast. I'm open for it. I'll have the link to the Apple Podcast and the link tree in the show notes, as well as the podcast trailers and everything you heard me bring up on this episode. So keep an eye out for that. For those of you wondering what I'm doing with the YouTube channel, I will be posting some of Season 2 on there. Big shout out to the 3 new people who smashed that subscribe button this past week. We really appreciate it. We will be looking out for you. I still can't see who's following me. Something about YouTube. We gotta be at 100 subscribers. Subscribers, is it? Followers, whatever, in order to check that out. So we are slowly but surely getting there. Doesn't matter. We love doing this. And finally, the Twitter account for the podcast is definitely growing in followers. Just a few weeks ago, we had about 30 followers. Ooh, we just started. And then I started like messing around with Twitter. So we've been interacting and active on Twitter and live tweeting, as well as doing the Follow Fridays. We are now up to 159 followers. And I just checked. Former NXT wrestler and current AEW standout Parker Bordeaux is following the podcast account. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on our way. We have a wrestler following our account. So I'm super excited about that. If you're not yet following us on the Twitterverse, now is a good time to do so. Check us out at apron_stories on Twitter. Okay, so now that we got that bit of stuff out of the way, let's talk about why you're here and what you came here to listen to. And that is from Under the Apron's greatest wrestling villains of all time. Well, our version of it. Now, you've heard me talk about wrestling with my action figures before and how I love playing with them, and you heard it on the crossover episodes of the MPSP Theater podcast and on episode 18. If you haven't yet, go check that out. I used to love intertwining action figures and wrestling. He-Man took on Mumra of Thundercats, and Lionel from Thundercats took on Skeletor from Master of the Universe. You know who He-Man is, right? I switched the villains on those characters. They're the most evil at the time. Even Cobra Commander had a hand in trying to get that championship belt, which would alternate between the sword from Master of the Universe or the Thundercats sword. Hey, I was a poor kid. I didn't have freaking wrestling toys like regular kids, I guess. I had little thumb things for wrestlers. You stick a thumb in the back of these wrestlers, and they were like rubber, and you would fight with them with your. It'd be like thumb wrestling, but you'd have your. Yeah, it's a weird description of doing it because then it's like you have their thumb up their butt. Yeah, but at the time there were many heroic good guy wrestling characters that I always want to emulate them onto my action figures. And with that came the villains that I was always thought they weren't so bad after all. Many of these villains I would grow to idolize as a fan, and they became good guys, but knowing that you are a fan, you know they played a bad villain better than they played a good hero. The first one on the list, man, the cream of the crop himself, Macho King Randy Savage. It was around 1989 when I heard about Macho Man. I get that he was at WrestleMania 3 when I said that Hulk Hogan vs. Andre the Giant was the first match that I was ever introduced to as a wrestling fan. But I didn't watch that whole tape until years later when Savage was beefing with Hulk Hogan. I skipped over WrestleMania 4 except for the ending. When I watched Randy Savage win the WWE Championship, I said, wait, isn't he the bad guy? I got, yeah, the looks my friends gave me. The year prior, he had lost the Intercontinental Championship against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat in one of the most influential matches of all time. If you haven't heard that story yet, there's still time. Legend has it that Macho Man wrote that match on a legal pad and they learned all those moves. Every move was done, even those that were outside the ring. I saw this on Dark Side of the Ring. So, yeah, Randy Savage wrote it and he made sure he sold it. Definitely an awesome match, so go check it out when you have the chance. WrestleMania 4, I didn't care too much for it, but I guess I needed to in order to understand what happened. But we can come back to that later. WrestleMania 5 is what made me a fan of the Savage. By WrestleMania 5, my favorite wrestling hero at the time was feuding with my favorite wrestling villain, I guess you could say. All because of Miss Elizabeth. Well, and because Randy Savage was jealous. It's a jealousy thing. Uh, Toxic. Now, knowing now, and going back to all the documentaries we've seen about this, specifically Dark Side of the Ring, where Savage was overprotective of Miss Elizabeth, that he would always lock her away in his dressing room. But at the time, you didn't know anything about that. You just thought this man really is jealous that Hulk Hogan is protecting Randy's ballet. That it got Savage so jealous and remorseful that he would really break up his friendship over it. Heel Randy Savage from WrestleMania 3 is very different from heel Savage from WrestleMania 5. This is heel Savage. I'm very jealous that you're going after my wife or my manager girlfriend slash girlfriend, I guess, instead of heel Randy Savage from WrestleMania 3. It's just the title, but I'm still gonna beat your ass. No matter what happened at WrestleMania 3, he would still have Miss Elizabeth in his corner. After WrestleMania 5, though, he switched it up and got Sensational Sherry. Yeah, she in the Hall of Fame yet. If she's not, she needs to be there because wow. Anyway, he defeated Hacksaw Jim dug in at the King of the Ring, got a crown, and dubbed himself Macho King. And for 3 whole years, guys, for 3 whole years, Savage terrorized the entire WWF with long-term feuds against Hulk Hogan and then setting his eyes on his next victim, the common man, Dusty Rhodes. The American Dream, baby. During his time as king, he wasn't the champion at all. He should have been. Got the Intercontinental Championship or another shot at the world title, but he was basically the king. King Randy Savage. You don't need anything. He just needs to be the king. And the king did what he had to do to Dusty Rhodes. With Hulk Hogan as the main guy and the Ultimate Warrior taking over, Macho King wanted another shot at the big gold, but Warrior refused. So when it came down for Warrior to defend his championship title against Sergeant Slaughter, yeah, that's Sergeant Slaughter from the G.I. Joe movie. Yeah, his backstory is pretty complicated. Yeah, that's another guy that I'll come back to. Macho King did what he always does and inflicted madness against his adversaries. He came down to the ring and blasted a scepter onto the Ultimate Warrior's head, costing him his match and the championship. That same night, though, Macho King didn't show up to the Royal Rumble. Instead, him and his queen, Sherry, left the arena to avoid the Ultimate Warrior. I wouldn't blame him either. I don't want to get the Warrior mad at me. Have you seen him? Of course, this made way to the retirement match at WrestleMania 7. The evil villain, Macho King Randy Savage, putting his career on the line against the second best heroic face in the WWF, the Ultimate Warrior. Yeah, I said it. The second best. Not even the second best, because he is just like freaking upset. The next year. Yeah, it's the whole thing. I gotta find out what episode it was, but he gets fired. And it's the same year that Hulk Hogan came back to get his world title back. Macho King did whatever he thought was necessary to try to defeat the Ultimate Warrior, but he still couldn't get the job done. Instead, he turned face that night, or kinda, He was helped by his old flame valet after Queen Sherry turned on him and kicked him, and did all berated him and everything. Miss Elizabeth came down to the ring to help him and kicked Queen Sherry out of the ring, which led to the most memorable reunions in the history of the WWF. You just read the crowd. Some of them were crying. Those are true fans. The 80s, 90s fans were the best fans ever. And ever since then, you can't help but not trust in the Macho Man because he will always have that evil streak in him. He is, after all, madness. Here's another man you can't trust. Jake the Snake Roberts. He has always been a heel to me. You can count his face turn in the time he faced two notable heel wrestlers, Ravishing Rick Rude and the model Rick Martel. But other than that, I always viewed him as the slimy, conniving heel. And with that came the title of one of the most evil and vile villains of all time. His creepy demeanor, the way he slithers into the ring, the way he slowly talks in his intense and cerebral promos, and the way he says, "Trust me." This guy knows what he's doing. And if his psychological ring work isn't enough for you to hate him or admit he's evil, then maybe his pet, Python, will. When he made his debut in 1986, he would bring a Burmese python named Damien with him in a big sack bag. After taking care of his opponents, he would go to his corner, pick up the Burmese python in the sack bag, and just let him out. He would let Damien out of the bag and place him on top of his defeated opponents. It was fun for the kids, I guess. but the way he does it, no matter what role he was playing, either a super intense heel or a face, due to his popularity of him and his python, he would still remain the same Snake. The biggest villain moment he has ever done was in the summer of 1991 when he betrayed the biggest face in the WWE at the time, the Ultimate Warrior, who was feuding with The Undertaker. In the setup, Roberts explained to Warrior that after passing 3 tests, he would have the knowledge of the dark side to defeat The Undertaker. The segments included Warrior being locked inside a coffin, a reprise of an incident that occurred on the funeral parlor hosted by The Undertaker's manager Paul Bearer earlier in the year, the Warrior being buried alive in dirt before being abandoned, and the Warrior walking through a room full of live snakes to reach a chest containing the answer. During the latter segment, the Warrior opened the chest, only to be immediately bitten by King Cobra, which was actually a Robert prop. Come on. As Warrior weakened from the effects of the Cobra strike, Robert was joined by The Undertaker and Paul Bearer, revealing the three were working together all along. Robert closed the final segment by proclaiming, "Never trust a snake," turning Robert's heel for the first time since 1987. After SummerSlam, Roberts was placed in the feud with Randy Savage. During the post-SummerSlam wedding reception of Savage and Miss Elizabeth, in reality they had been married since 1984, but hey, let's make this a whole storyline, I guess. Elizabeth opened a gift package containing a live cobra. Gee, I wonder who was it from. Roberts and The Undertaker attacked Savage until Sid Justice ran them off. A short feud with Sid ensued when Sid was scheduled to wrestle El Diablo, and The Undertaker came out and accepted the challenge to face Sid. Paul Bearer offered El Diablo what appeared to be a bribe to walk away. As the match began, El Diablo came back to hit the ring and hit Sid. Then El Diablo unmasked, revealing himself as Jake. It's still the same thing, right? El Diablo, Jake. Roberts proceeded to unleash a King Cobra on Sid until Hacksaw Jim Duggan intervened. Sid and Jake wrestled on Superstars a week later, but soon Sid injured his biceps, which forced the feud to end. Roberts immediately began berating Randy Savage in a series of promos, aware that Savage, who had lost a retirement match to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 7, was unable to exact revenge. Well, on the November 23rd edition of WWF Superstars of Wrestling, Roberts goaded Savage to the ring and brutally attacked him, eventually tying Savage into the ropes and got the King Cobra to bite his arm. The snake was venomized, and according to Robert's DVD Pick Your Poison and other podcasts, as well as the Dark Side of the Ring episode of Randy Savage, he had trouble getting the Cobra to release his bite. According to Roberts, on the day the angle was shot, he had to let the Cobra bite him on his leg at Savage's request to convince him that the snake had been devenomized, and Savage would regularly check on Roberts to make sure he had no side effects from the bite. The segment went on longer than planned, and Savage's blood was clearly visible as it dripped from the puncture wounds. Savage stated in a shoot interview that his arm swelled and he developed a high fever afterward and had to be checked at the hospital. He also stated that the Cobra died a week after the angle, and he joked that the Cobra must have got the venom from him. Robert is currently working for AEW managing Lance Archer and still being that creepy, slithering, conniving bastard that nobody trusts. The next people on this list I'm adding was a stable created as a means to an end, so to speak, according to this person's reasoning. This is basically what in The Dark Knight is quoted as saying, either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. So we're going to start off with a little story of someone else, and from there is where we get to the part where this person comes in. So just like Ron Simmons, Farouk, would say, I just told you sis, so I can tell you that. Back in 1994 in WCW, the Nasty Boys were bullying this dyslexic wrestler named Dave Sullivan, who would regularly mispronounce his name as Evid. Well, after getting injured by them one too many times, he decided to bring in his brother Kevin. In turn, Kevin brought in Cactus Jack to help since Dave was injured and couldn't fight his bullies. That summer, Dave Sullivan met his longtime hero, the real American himself, Hulk Hogan, who had just joined WCW. This infuriated Kevin Sullivan because he thought he was Dave's hero. It became more problematic as Dave decided to dress more like his hero and come out to the ring wearing red and yellow. And out of pure jealousy, Kevin turned on his brother and soon after decided to feud with him all through 1995, even going as far as to involve Hogan in the feud. This allowed Kevin Sullivan to reach into his friends list and get help from an insider who knew all about Hogan. Entered the man formerly named as Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Now, due to copyright infringement and because the name belonged to WWF at the time, he came in now known as the Butcher. More or less the same type of gimmick, but, Butcher, the Barber, it's the same thing. You get the gist of it. Kevin later got a third member into his group, which was the former WWF Earthquake, now known as Avalanche. Yeah, you can tell WCW had ideas for these former WWF guys. Kevin, Butcher, and Avalanche became known as the Three Phases of Fear, and their goal was to destroy Hulkamania. However, they didn't accomplish their goal as more people came into WCW to help Hulk Hogan, such as his best friend in the whole world, Macho Man Randy Savage. These defeats didn't stop Kevin Sullivan as he retreated to fight another day and circled back later in 1995 and started hearing voices of someone calling out for him. Once he found the source of the voice inside a dungeon, he found the Master, who rechristened Kevin Sullivan as the Taskmaster, and their goal was once again destroy Hulkamania. Basically, destroy Hulk Hogan and what it stands for. Destroy the goodness of Hulk Hogan, because the Taskmaster saw nothing but evil inside of him, which was foreshadowing for what 1996 would become. The two men quickly put together a team for what their stable would become known as the Dungeon of Doom. Yes, just like the DC cartoons. In this case, the Legion of Doom, consisting of Lex Luthor, Riddler, Sinestro, Gulligrod, Scarecrow. I always wondered why the Joker wasn't in this. Or anybody that was a counterpart of the superheroes of the DC and their mission was to destroy the Justice League of Superheroes. In the same sense, the Dungeon recruited the Butcher and Avalanche again, but now known and going by as the Zodiac Man and the Shark, respectively. The group grew in size too, including a who's who of all and any wrestling villain that have had a past in the WWF. And gonna add more to the list as I remember, but the list goes as follows. Kamala, the Ugandan giant, the Barbarian, Meng, who we did a special episode on a few months ago. Check out episode 36, season 1 if you haven't. The One Man Gang, Hugh Morris, Big Bubba Rogers, and for a short time, Big Van Vader. None of these would win over. They would lose. The Master revealed that it's etched in stone that a giant would be the one to destroy Hulkamania. This would lead to a War Games match inside two cages. Where Hulk Hogan's team won, but was later attacked by the Giant, who was revealed to be a new member of the Dungeon of Doom, and Andre's son, who was seeking revenge for what Hogan did to him 10 years ago. For those that don't know, I'm talking about Andre the Giant. Kevin made plans for the Giant to face Hulk Hogan in October of that year for the WWE World title, and during those months, they shaved Hogan's iconic mustache, as well as beat him down some more to the point that Hogan was starting to wear black instead of his iconic red and yellow. Again, foreshadowing what's to come later. He knew. This culminated at the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view where Giant won the world title due to Hogan's manager, Jimmy Hart, betraying him and joining the Dungeon of Doom. This was the plan laid out by Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster, the most evil villain in all of wrestling.
What up? I'm Dave.
And I'm Jay.
And we invite you to check out our show, Commute The Podcast. Every Monday, in roughly 20 minutes, we'll cover 3 topics that we find interesting, and we're betting that you might just find them interesting too. Things like why presidents don't grow facial hair anymore, who owns the song Happy Birthday, and why you're probably related to Genghis Khan. Our goal is simple. We want you to stop dreading that commute and instead learn something and make yourself the most interesting person in the room. Commute the Podcast, available now on any podcast platform.
Hey guys, this is Ernie. We're going to get to the next segment in a few, but let me tell you about Dark Fate Creations, okay? Dark Fate Creations would like to invite you to a new and unique experience in candles and wax melts. They hand pour and create every single product using quality, clean, and safe ingredients. Their candles are filled with romantic wooden wicks and made with a coconut soy blend of waxes for a safer, cleaner, and longer burn. The designs are unique and beautiful, but more importantly, they smell absolutely amazing. And the variety of fragrances have something for everyone. Hand poured in Grass Valley, California. Check them out at darkfatecreations.com. Link of the site in the show notes below. Another wrestler or stable that was the exact opposite of that was in the WWF. And my number one pick of top non-champions of the 80s and 90s era. If you haven't heard that one yet, it's episode 39. I talk about why this man deserved to be a WWF World Champion, but didn't get the recognition. And he is one of my favorite villains. I also talk about his stable in episode 19. If a man can have a snake as a pet and be the most feared, then what could top that? Money, greed. Enter the most privileged of all villains in wrestling. A millionaire. Yes, that millionaire. On June 27th, 1987, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, was born. Well, he made his debut in the WWF. A millionaire who wore a gold-studded, dollar-sign covered suit, and in time, a custom-made, diamond-encrusted and self-awarded $1 Million Championship belt. He was billed as having a spring residence in Palm Beach, Florida, a summer residence in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, an autumn residence in Bel Air, California, and a winter residence in the Netherlands Antilles. DiBiase had a bodyguard by the name of Virgil, who was by his side during his matches and vignettes. He was often seen performing humiliating tasks, such as rubbing DiBiase's feet. DiBiase claimed, "Everybody has a price," demonstrating his power through a series of promos in which he did things such as bribe the manager of a local swimming pool to close for the day so he could have the pool to himself. Or when the honeymoon suite in a hotel was already booked, he bribed the desk clerk to have the couple already in there thrown out. Other skits featured DiBiase traveling in limousines, giving $100 tips to waiters, and using $100 bills in convenience stores for small purchases like chewing gum. During one skit, he invited a young boy onto the stage and told him if he bounced the ball 15 times in succession, DiBiase would pay him $500. After the 14th bounce, DiBiase kicked the ball away, sending the boy home crying and without pay. His first villain scheme came in late 1987 when on an episode of Superstars of Wrestling, he wanted to buy the WWF World Championship belt off of Hulk Hogan. Of course, Hogan said no, and that he would have Of course, Hogan said no, and that he would have to face him for the championship in order to hold it. After a series of matches, he was defeated and was never able to obtain the championship, which he wanted to buy off of in the first place from what arguably people thought of the superhero of the WWF, Hulk Hogan. That's another episode for later on. Refusing no for an answer, obviously rich white man mentality, he asked one man to win the championship for him. And on the February 5th, 1988 edition of the main event, which aired live on NBC, Andre the Giant defeated Hogan under questionable circumstances for the WWF World Heavyweight Championship. The referee for this match, Dave Hebner, was paid for. He counted the match finishing pin for Andre despite the fact that Hogan's shoulder was up at the count of 1. And to add a plot twist, his twin brother and real Dave Hebner came running to the ring and to dispute the ruling his evil twin had made awarding the WWF World Championship to Andre the Giant. Andre then announced he was surrendering the championship belt and handed it to DiBiase. In the following days, DiBiase was in fact billed as the WWF World Heavyweight Champion in 3 house shows, defending the title one time against Bam Bam Bigelow. However, the president of the WWF at the time, Jack Tunney, declared that DiBiase was not the champion because he did not win by pin or submission, so the title was declared vacant. A tournament was announced for the vacant World Championship, and it will culminate in March of 1988 at WrestleMania 4. The $1 Million Man entered and won 2 matches, but was awarded a bye to the final round of the tournament. Backstage, during an interview, it was revealed that Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan were disqualified, and DiBiase had paid Andre money to make sure Hogan didn't advance in the match. Classic villain's move. But unfortunately, karma caught up to him, as he was not able to win that tournament that night. Instead, it was Randy Savage who won that night, with the help of his best friend, Hulk Hogan. Other villainous shenanigans he has done throughout the tenure of his career include buying a contract from another manager so that wrestler could become his personal slave, buying the number 30 spot from a wrestler so that he could be the last to come out at the 1989 Royal Rumble. After numerous attempts of trying to win the gold on the March 11th Saturday night's main event 20, after that match, he introduced the $1 Million Championship, his own championship belt, which was not recognized by the WWF. He created this belt because he was unable to buy or win the WWF World Heavyweight Championship from Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. So why not just make one for yourself? After several years of holding on to the $1 Million Championship and claiming to be the best, in 1992 he formed a team with a character named Irwin R. Shyster, or IRS for short. Yeah, you get that. And they named themselves Money Incorporated, with the managerial services of Jimmy Hart, who you all heard earlier. They became one of the top tag teams in the 90s, pulling every villainous and evil move or scheme just so they can be 3-time tag team champions. On one of the first episodes of Monday Night Raw, DiBiase faced and defeated Brutus the Barber Beefcake, and with the help of IRS, slammed his face with a metal briefcase. Side quest: Brutus Beefcake's face had just been surgically repaired due to a parasailing accident he had a few years ago, which was a big deal at the time. And what did DiBiase do? He hit him and sent him back to the hospital. This got the attention of Hulk Hogan, who was semi-retired and came back to the WWF to team with his best friend, Beefcake, to face IRS and DiBiase at WrestleMania 9. However, Hogan and Beefcake didn't win the match due to the antics of DiBiase and the IRS. In 1994, he quietly retired from active competition, but he was still around and thus created the stable, the $1 Million Corporation. His first villainous move came when he bought the contract of WWF legend Nikolai Volkov and made him do ridiculous things such as wear scents on his wrestling gear. Later on, he would swerve everyone by buying contracts off wrestlers who we all knew and loved as faces and turned them into heels, such as the 1-2-3 Kid, who is now known as X-Pac. The biggest swerve, though, came when he bought out the services of one Native American Tatanka, who betrayed his best friend, the All-American Lex Luger, proving to all that everyone has a price for the $1 Million Man. And finally, the last story of the night is one of my favorites. It's one of my co-hosts' favorite, Michael. We loved telling you this story a while back, so here it is again. A lot of controversy has surrounded the fabulous Moolah, and if you haven't yet, check out her episode on Dark Side of the Ring. She's done a lot of shady stuff behind the scenes, thus being a true villain in and outside of the ring. In June 1984, the fabulous Moolah sold her rights to the women's world title to Vince McMahon after they had broken ties with the NWA once again. By agreeing to the very lucrative offer, she would also compete exclusively for the newly named World Wrestling Federation and become their first women's champion. Before this, it is estimated that from 1956 to 1983, the fabulous Moolah held her title for 11,000 days. Not consecutive, but in total. On July 23, 1984, in the Brawl to End It All broadcast on MTV, the fabulous Moolah with Captain Lou Albano in her corner lost her title to the exciting Wendy Richter, who was accompanied by Cyndi Lauper. The ending consisted of such an odd pinning predicament that the decision could have gone either way. This was a pivotal moment in the Rock and Wrestling Connection era. Despite 11 matches on the card, this was the only one that was televised on MTV and was a huge step forward for women's wrestling and the WWF in their continued pursuit to become the only pro wrestling company in the USA. Moolah, unaccustomed to losing, took out her frustrations at the end of the match on the referee. Conveniently ignoring the belt lineage and not recognizing the title changes before Moolah arrived in the WWF, the event was promoted as Moolah being the undefeated champion who had held the belt for 28 straight years. She went along with this lie of invincibility and when interviewed, never mentioned the 4 times she had lost it. After a couple of title defenses against Moolah, Richter finally dropped it to Leilani Kai with Moolah's interference in February of 1985. Richter regained it at the inaugural WrestleMania in March, but the title would not elude Moolah for long. Later that year, she became champion once again, but in a bizarre set of circumstances during a match that is often referred to as the original Screwjob. And for those that don't know, there have been lots of Screwjobs. Most recently in 1997, which was Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, that Screwjob, the Montreal Screwjob. But here is the original Screwjob. It is significant because, perhaps for the first time publicly on a big stage, we witnessed the lengths Moolah would go to maintain herself on top. Ignoring whatever had been planned, Moolah disguised as the Spider gained a pin on Richter when it was evident that her shoulders weren't down. In the storyline, Moolah claims that disguising herself as the preliminary wrestler called the Spider was the only way she could get Richter to defend the title against her after 6 months of trying and being denied. Afterward, Wendy left WWF forever until her WWE Hall of Fame induction in 2010, but never spoke to Moolah again. Theories on what exactly happened that night in Madison Square Garden abound. It has been said that Richter had various disagreements with Vince McMahon about her compensation. But if she was underpaid, it was compared to the male wrestlers. The only person earning more than her on the women's WWF roster was Moolah. According to David Shoemaker and Grantland.com, Richter was surprised to see Moolah on a card she wasn't scheduled for, but she also saw Glenn Dean, or sometimes spelled Glenn Dean, who had wrestled as the Spider. But more recent sources like the book Sisterhood of the Squared Circle assured that Penny Mitchell wrestled as the Spider later on and off from the start, just after the inaugural WrestleMania. Richter realized something was amiss when she saw that the Spider had seemingly changed shape once she got a good look at her in the ring. She was now shorter and shaped like an older woman. Even the fans were yelling Moolah about a minute into the bout. Richter said that she expected anything from Moolah, but added, "What I didn't count on was the referee getting paid off." This might sound strange now, but during this time, the referees, timekeepers, and state-appointed medics were not WWF employees, but instead assigned by the different state athletic commissions, and in this case, it was the one from New York. The crooked referee in question, Dick Kroll, was a former pro wrestler and was the head referee used in their monthly Madison Square Garden shows. "I'm an honest and trusting person, and I thought the referee was as well," Richter explains. After maybe 7 minutes, Moolah did a small package or something that you can usually kick out of. The referee counted 1 and I lifted my shoulder up. The ref then counted 2, 3 very fast, and that was the end of the match. I was so angry that I just walked right out of the building in my wrestling gear, wrestling boots, grabbed my wrestling bag and went outside and hailed a cab. I went straight to the airport in my wrestling gear, got my ticket, and changed my clothes in the airport restroom. If they had wanted me to drop the belt, I wouldn't have had a problem with it if I had been compensated properly. She received $500 for that match. Then she says, "Some people from the office called me several days later, but I didn't pick up the phone. Vince or Moolah never called me directly, and I never spoke to them again. I don't hate Moolah's guts, and I don't wish her evil. I just don't like her and don't trust her, and I'm not going to act like I do." Then the match that night in Madison Square Garden became known as the original Screwjob, and was the last match fan favorite Richter ever worked in the WWF. Wendy wouldn't appear in anything WWF WWE related for the next 25 years until she was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2010. After the Screwjob finish, Richter wrestled in the Caribbean for the World Wrestling Council, winning the women's title twice and having a vicious feud with Monster Ripper, and later the AWA, winning the title there and holding it for nearly a year. She later obtained her master's degree and became an occupational therapist and dog breeder, breeding several champions at the prestigious Westminster Kennel Club dog show in NYC. Journalist Dave Meltzer wrote an obituary for the fabulous Moolah in which he stated that different promoters had very different ideas of what being professional meant. Wrestling historian Tim Hornbaker said that Moolah chose not to break the dishonest, greedy practices established by her mentor, Billy Wolf. Pat LaPrade and Diane Murphy, in their book Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, wrote that Moolah's tactics could just be as ruthless and cutthroat as those as the Godfather Don Corleone. Wendy Richter and Mad Maxine both claimed that Moolah did not actually train the wrestlers at her wrestling school. According to Richter, Ellison accepted payment of the training fee, which at the time of Richter's training was $500, and had other female wrestlers within her camp, including Leilani Kai, Judy Martin, Winona Littleheart, and Joyce Grable, trained the new recruits. These women did not get paid for additional work as trainers. Richter also claimed that Moolah required all women that received training at her camp to sign a contract that allowed Moolah to function as their booker and receive 25% of their booking fee. Trainees were also required to rent duplex apartment on Moolah's property, and they were responsible for paying her for rent and utilities. The training lasted 6 months and took place up to 5 hours per day inside a wrestling ring in a barn that lacked heating and air conditioning or fans. Mad Maxine said that due to owning Moolah booth, rent, and training fees amounting to $1,500, the trainees went into debt to Moolah and she controlled their lives. It was an environment ripe for abuse. Maxine also said that when she went to work for WWF, Moolah was taking at least half of her earnings. Debbie Johnson, another female trainee of Moolah, stated that she was required to give Moolah 30% of her booking fee, and her paycheck was further reduced as Moolah deducted travel expenses, food, rent, and utilities before paying her. As a result, Johnson worked for Moolah for 2 years before she received any money. Johnson stated that Moolah would refuse to book certain women in her training camp if they angered her, and that Moolah monitored her and refused to let her leave the physical training constraints of the training camp unless she was accompanied by someone else. As well as allegedly exploiting female wrestlers sexually, Moolah was accused of using her influence to control the women's wrestling scene and ensure that other women did not gain greater recognition. In addition to being a key participant in the original Screwjob on Wendy Rickner, Moolah used her influence to take over the spot originally held by her protege Mad Maxine on the animated series Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling. Maxine was about to receive a big push by Vince McMahon, but left the WWF shortly afterwards. As Moolah was unwilling to provide her with additional bookings, Maxine said that Moolah never told her about the WWF plan to include her in their cartoon. Numerous other female trainees directed from Moolah after growing tired of sharing their paychecks with Moolah. Women wrestlers including Vivian and Luna Vachon, Ann Casey, and Darling Dagmar moved into other regions where Ellison, Moolah, had less control and negotiated their own payouts with promoters. Her legacy. Dave Meltzer described that women's wrestling went way down under Moolah's tutelage, but also said he did not know if it was her fault. Meltzer said that although women used the headline and they were successful during the period Moolah controlled women's wrestling, the popularity and product didn't evolve. However, Meltzer noted that Moolah herself stood the test of time to remain culturally relevant along after Japanese female wrestlers in the 1980s, more popular at that time, had faded from relevance. In March 2018, WWE announced the Fabulous Moolah Memorial Battle Royal, a battle royal for the female wrestlers of the company scheduled for WrestleMania 34, named in honor of Moolah. The decision to hold a battle royal in honor of Moolah drew controversy after the allegations of exploitation against Moolah resurfaced. 2 days after the announcement, WWE renamed the match WrestleMania Women's Battle Royal, removing Moolah's name from the event. A 2019 episode of Dark Side of the Ring broadcast on Viceland examined the allegations against her in the aftermath of the Battle Royal named Controversy. The episode repeated many of the allegations against her, but also featured comments from the son of Sweet Georgia Brown and wrestlers Selena Majors and Beverly Shade, who defended her. If I choose not to like her because of what she did to me, that's fine. Princess Victoria stated, but Moolah needs to be remembered. She was an icon in the business. You can't take away her history because she was an asshole. So, that's going to do it for us on this very special edition of the pod. Don't worry, I'll have another list soon. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But I did want to put this out there in the wrestling multiverse just in case someone had any addition or exceptions to this list. If you wish to add to this list and want me to include them, send me an email at FromUnderTheApron@gmail.com, or we can have you on the podcast and you can tell me your reason. October starts this Saturday, and I'm already planning episodes for the month ahead. All month long, I'll be watching and taking a look back at old viewings of WWE's Halloween Havoc, and might as well ask you the question now. Who is your favorite horror-inspired wrestler from any era? Let us know by sending us an email or voice your opinion and calling us. Thank you for listening to the show and supporting us. You can find us on all other sort of social platforms. First, with the Nerdvana Network, or TNN for short, which is a conglomerate of podcasts that promote each other's common interests, so give us a follow as well. Check out the Linktree, linktree.com/ the Nerdvana Network for more on that. I created a link tree for the show so you can follow us on all our socials as well. Go to linktree.com/from under the apron. It has the link to the Twitter and Instagram account and the links to Spotify, Anchor, totally free by the way, and now Apple Podcasts and iTunes accounts. There's also the YouTube account where you can smash that subscribe button. We already got 26 subscribers. That's growing. We're growing. We are all growing. And speaking of growth, check us out on the Twitter account. We are interacting with other podcasts there, retweeting podcasts that I'm currently listening to or will be when I have downtime. We do the live tweeting while watching the pay-per-views. We are very social there, so, talk to us there. Send us a message of your favorite wrestling stories either by email. It is FromUnderTheApron@gmail.com, or click on the link if you want to leave us a voice message. Doesn't matter if you're trolling or want to promote your business. We will still air it. Check out the show notes on Spotify. You will find the link to the Nerdvana Network, our link tree, and link to other podcast trailers that you heard. The podcast that you heard earlier, that will be there as well. The next link, if you want to support our podcast, go ahead and click that second link. It will ask you if you want to donate money once a month. Charges range from 99 cents to $4.99 to $9.99. You can cancel anytime. So far, we have a few supporters, and I'm making it a habit for those few supporters to know any updates I make with the podcast or new episodes. They're kind of like our VIP wrestling junkies. They get the behind the ropes treatment, if you will. They immediately know when our shows are posted or when we plan our recording. Email your questions, comments, ratings, or concerns at FromUnderTheApron@gmail.com or the other socials, and I will try my best to get to them and answer them from under the apron. So once again, happy International Podcast Day! See y'all next time.